The Wyoming wilderness had seen its share of remarkable marksmen, but Thomas Hawthorne was something entirely different. For 2 decades, he'd tended his remote ranch in Shadow Creek Valley with weathered hands and watchful eyes, known only as the elderly rancher who spoke little and kept to himself. The locals had grown accustomed to his solitary presence, never suspecting that the old man, who could barely grip his coffee cup, also happened to be the most lethal rifleman the American West had ever produced. That was about to change the day. The Scarlet Riders roared into his valley, not realizing they'd crossed paths with a legend who'd spent 20 years waiting for trouble to find him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Shadow Creek Valley lay nestled between towering peaks of the Wyoming Range, its rugged beauty masking a strategic importance known to very few. Thomas Hawthorne's ranch sat perched on the valley's northern ridge, a seemingly modest spread that commanded an unobstructed view of the only passage wide enough for vehicles to enter the valley. Local folks had long since stopped wondering why a man his age would choose such an isolated location, writing it off as another elderly rancher's eccentricity. Every morning, precisely at sunrise, Hawthorne would ease his aged frame into his weathered 1985 Ford pickup truck and make the winding drive into Carson's Ridge, the valley's only town. The truck's familiar rattle had become part of the valley's morning soundtrack, as predictable as the sunrise itself. He'd take his usual seat at May's diner, gnarled hands trembling slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, appearing every bit the fragile rancher his neighbors assumed him to be. What they didn't notice was how those same trembling hands grew perfectly steady when nobody was watching, or how his rheumy eyes missed nothing that moved through the valley. May's diner sat at the heart of Carson's Ridge, a town of barely 800 souls where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. The morning regulars had their usual spots. Bill Henderson, the hardware store owner, always claimed the corner booth by the window. Sarah Martinez, who ran the local veterinary clinic, preferred the counter seats near the coffee machine. And old Jack Turner, the retired schoolteacher, held court at the central table, where he could participate in everyone's conversations. Behind the carefully crafted facade of infirmity, Hawthorne maintained a daily ritual that would have shocked the townspeople who thought they knew him. In a hidden room beneath his barn, accessible only through a carefully concealed entrance designed to look like a standard storm cellar, walls lined with custom-built rifle racks held a collection of precision weapons that would have put most military arsenals to shame. Each morning before dawn, despite his 73 years, he would make a 2-mile trek to various concealed positions overlooking the valley, practicing shots that most professional snipers would consider impossible. These hidden positions, carefully chosen and prepared over 2 decades, offered coverage of every significant approach to the valley. Each location had been meticulously documented in a worn leather notebook. Distance calculations, wind patterns, seasonal changes in visibility, all recorded with the precision of a man who understood that in his profession, detail meant the difference between life and death. The locals who occasionally spotted him walking the ridges assumed he was simply an old man enjoying nature. They never noticed how he measured distances with practiced eyes, or how he logged weather conditions in his mind with military precision. Sheriff Mike Randall, new to his position and the valley, had initially dismissed the stories about the old rancher. "Quiet sort, isn't he?" he'd asked May one morning, watching Hawthorne slowly stir his coffee. May, who'd served Hawthorne breakfast for nearly 20 years, simply shrugged. "Some men earn their silence," she'd replied, though she couldn't have known how true those words were. The sheriff, fresh from a larger department in Idaho, had yet to learn that in places like Shadow Creek Valley, still waters often ran deeper than they appeared. The valley's peaceful routine had continued unchanged until the morning Tommy Fletcher, the teenage son of local hardware store owner, came rushing into May's diner, his eyes wide with excitement. The bell above the door jangled violently as he burst in, drawing irritated looks from the regular customers who preferred their morning coffee without dramatic interruptions. "You won't believe what I saw up by Dead Horse Pass," he burst out, drawing everyone's attention except Hawthorne's. Whole convoy of trucks and motorcycles looked like some kind of gang. Must have been 20 vehicles at least. Hawthorne's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips, a motion so subtle only May noticed it. His weathered features remained impassive, but something shifted in his pale blue eyes, a glimpse of the man he'd once been, the legend that time and the government had tried to erase. To the casual observer, he appeared to be nothing more than another elderly patron, slightly annoyed by a teenager's outburst. But beneath that carefully maintained exterior, decades of training and experience had already begun calculating angles, distances, and response times. In the hidden room beneath his barn, a worn military file lay sealed in a weatherproof case. Inside, faded photographs showed a younger Hawthorne in various combat zones, his face bearing the same distant expression he wore now. The file contained mission reports that read like fiction, impossible shots made under impossible conditions, confirmed kills at distances that defied what experts claimed was possible. But most importantly, it contained the real reason he'd chosen this particular valley, this specific vantage point, and why he'd spent 20 years watching and waiting. The valley's strategic location made it perfect for what he'd always known would eventually come. Criminals seeking a secure route for their operations, drawn by the isolation and limited law enforcement presence. He'd chosen his ranch's location, carefully making sure it overlooked every possible approach. For 2 decades, he'd maintained his cover as nothing more than a quiet old rancher, knowing that someday someone would make the mistake of seeing Shadow Creek Valley as an easy target. Now, as he listened to Tommy's excited description of the approaching convoy, Hawthorne allowed himself a small smile. In the Pentagon's classified archives, he was still listed as the most successful long-range combat specialist in U.S. military history. His shots had changed the course of 3 wars, though those records were sealed so deeply even most generals couldn't access them. He'd spent 20 years preparing this valley, marking distances, calculating wind patterns, establishing hidden positions that would let him control every inch of territory within 2 miles of any major approach. The Scarlet Riders were about to learn why some old men are best left alone, and why the deadliest predators are often the ones that seem the least threatening. Take a quick break and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. The morning calm at May's diner shattered as the first distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through Shadow Creek Valley. Tommy Fletcher's warning had given them perhaps 15 minutes before the convoy would reach town, and already the atmosphere had shifted. Bill Henderson moved to lock the hardware store's front door, his weathered hands fumbling with keys that had turned the same lock for 30 years. Sarah Martinez hurriedly called her veterinary clinic, instructing her assistant to bring in any animals from the outdoor kennels. Hawthorne remained at his usual spot, methodically finishing his coffee, as though nothing had changed. But his sharp eyes caught every detail of the town's reaction. Sheriff Randall's hand unconsciously moving to rest on his holstered pistol, May's subtle shift to move the day's cash register contents into the diner's ancient safe, old Jack Turner's. Quick phone calls to spread the word through town. These were good people, Hawthorne reflected, but they had no idea what was really coming. The Scarlet Riders' reputation had preceded them into Wyoming. 3 weeks ago, Hawthorne had intercepted police broadcasts about their activities 2 states over. They weren't just another motorcycle gang. They were something far more organized, more dangerous. Their pattern was always the same: move into isolated communities, establish control through intimidation, then use the location as a base for their broader criminal operations. They'd already taken over 3 small towns in Nevada and Idaho, their leadership showing a tactical sophistication that suggested military training. The convoy appeared first as dust clouds rising above Dead Horse Pass, then as glints of chrome and steel in the morning sun. Hawthorne counted them through the diner's window: 12 motorcycles, 3 lifted pickup trucks, and 2 black SUVs with tinted windows. The vehicles spread out as they entered town, a deployment that confirmed his suspicions about their training. This wasn't random. They were establishing control of key intersections, creating overlapping fields of view. "Sweet Lord," May whispered, watching from behind her counter as the first riders pulled into the diner's parking lot. Tommy wasn't exaggerating. The lead rider cut an imposing figure as he dismounted, well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of muscle that came from serious military training, not just gym work. His leather cut bore the Scarlet Riders insignia, a blood-red stallion rearing against a black background, but it was his bearing that caught Hawthorne's attention. The man moved with the practiced awareness of someone used to assessing threats, his eyes scanning surroundings in the same systematic pattern Hawthorne recognized from his own training. Marcus Reeves, Hawthorne thought to himself, putting a name to the face he'd studied in his intelligence files. Former Force Recon Marine, discharged under circumstances that remained classified. He'd transformed the Scarlet Riders from a typical outlaw motorcycle club into something far more dangerous, recruiting other veterans who'd struggled to readjust to civilian life. The diner's bell chimed as Reeves entered, followed by 2 of his lieutenants. The morning regulars fell silent, their coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Sheriff Randall stood slowly, maintaining a professional calm that Hawthorne had to admire given the circumstances. "Gentlemen," Randall spoke first, his voice steady. "Welcome to Carson's Ridge. I'm Sheriff Mike Randall." Reeves smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Beautiful town you have here, Sheriff. My friends and I are just passing through, looking for some breakfast and maybe a place to rest for a few days." The careful politeness in his voice carried an undercurrent of threat that everyone in the diner recognized. This wasn't a request, it was a statement of intent. The Scarlet Riders had chosen Shadow Creek Valley as their next target. May stepped forward, her hands only slightly trembling as she grabbed menus. "Coffee's fresh," she offered, maintaining the routines of hospitality even as tension filled the air. "Daily specials, biscuits and gravy." Reeves nodded appreciatively, but his attention had already shifted to Hawthorne, still quietly sitting at his usual spot. Something in the old man's stillness must have triggered his combat-trained instincts. He stepped closer, studying the seemingly frail figure with growing intensity. "This seat taken?" Reeves asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from Hawthorne. Without waiting for an answer, he sat down, his bulk making the diner's chair creak in protest. "I couldn't help but notice your ranch up on the North Ridge. Impressive view from up there." Hawthorne's gnarled hands continued their slight tremor as he set down his coffee cup. "Helps keep an eye on the cattle," he replied softly, his voice carrying the quaver of age that he'd spent years perfecting. Outside, more Scarlet Riders were spreading through town. Through the window, Hawthorne watched them, noting security camera positions, checking sight lines, identifying potential defensive positions. They were good, he had to admit. In another life, under different circumstances, they might have been the kind of men he'd have trained. "Thinking of staying a while," Reeves continued, his casual tone belied by the predatory assessment in his eyes. "Your property would make an excellent headquarters for our business interests. Might be interested in making you an offer." The diner had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the unlikely pair, the massive gang leader and the frail old rancher. In that moment of tension, only May noticed how Hawthorne's trembling hands had gone perfectly still, though his voice maintained its elderly quaver. "Not interested in selling," Hawthorne replied quietly. "Been there too long to leave now." Reeves leaned forward, his size making the movement subtly threatening. "Might want to reconsider that, old-timer. Prices of cattle being what they are, retirement might be your best option. Hate to see anything unfortunate happen to your property." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke after a shot. "Sheriffsy." Randall took a step forward, but Hawthorne's slight headshake stopped him. The old rancher slowly stood, his movements deliberate and seemingly stiff with age. "You boys enjoy your breakfast," he said softly, dropping his usual $5 bill on the table. As he shuffled toward the door, his elderly gait perfectly maintained, Hawthorne was already calculating distances, wind patterns, and fields of fire. The Scarlet Riders had just made their first mistake, though they wouldn't realize it until it was far too late. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning sun had climbed higher over Shadow Creek Valley as Hawthorne's old Ford pickup made its way along the winding road toward his ranch. In his rearview mirror, he could see two motorcycles from the Scarlet Riders following at what he thought was a discreet distance. Their attempt at surveillance would have been almost amusing if it hadn't been so predictable. Through decades of combat experience, he'd learned that overconfident adversaries were often the easiest to outmaneuver. The ranch house came into view, its weathered exterior maintaining the carefully crafted image of a modest working ranch. What the Scarlet Riders couldn't know was that every approaching vehicle had already triggered hidden sensors. Their movements, captured by cameras concealed in seemingly random pieces of farm equipment. In his truck's cab, a carefully hidden display showed 3 more motorcycles approaching from the eastern access road, trying to flank his position. Hawthorne parked, in his usual spot, maintaining the unhurried movements of an elderly rancher as he climbed down from the cab. His observers would see exactly what they expected. An old man going about his morning routine, checking his mailbox with trembling hands, taking slow, careful steps toward his front porch. They wouldn't notice how those movements gave him precise readings of wind speed and direction, or how each pause allowed him to mark their positions. The lead rider from the eastern approach came into view first, dust rising from his motorcycle as he roared up the ranch's main drive. The man was younger than most of Reeves's crew, probably ex-military, but lacking the patience that experience brought. He pulled up aggressively, gravel spraying as he braked, clearly trying to intimidate. "Need to have another chat about that offer, old-timer," the rider called out, killing his engine. His hand rested casually near a concealed weapon, poorly hidden under his leather jacket. "Boss thinks you might have misunderstood the situation back in town." Hawthorne paused on his porch steps, leaning heavily on the railing as if the short walk had tired him. "Nothing to misunderstand," he replied, his voice maintaining its elderly quaver. "Not interested in selling." The other riders had encircled the front of the house now, their positions showing good tactical training but poor understanding of the terrain. They'd placed themselves exactly where Hawthorne had anticipated, in spots that seemed to offer good coverage, but actually left them exposed to pre-sighted firing positions he'd established years ago. "See, that's where you're wrong," the young rider continued, dismounting with aggressive confidence. "Boss says this property's perfect for our needs. High ground, good visibility, plenty of storage space." He started up the porch steps, hand moving more deliberately toward his weapon. "You're getting a generous offer here, Gramps. Smart thing would be to take it and enjoy your retirement somewhere warm." What happened next occurred so quickly that later none of the riders could quite agree on the sequence of events. The young man's hand had barely touched his concealed pistol when Hawthorne moved. Gone was any trace of age or infirmity. His movements were fluid, precise, and devastatingly effective. Before anyone could react, the young rider found himself disarmed, his own weapon pressed against his throat as Hawthorne used him as a shield. "First mistake," Hawthorne spoke, his voice now carrying the cold authority of command, "was assuming. Age equals weakness. Second mistake was telegraphing your draw. Third, and most important, was thinking you had control of this situation." The other riders had drawn their weapons, but found themselves in an impossible position. Their companion was perfectly positioned to block any clear shot, and something in Hawthorne's stance told them they were dealing with someone far beyond their experience level. "Easy now, old man," one of the other riders called out, trying to project calm authority despite his obvious shock. "No need for this to get messy." "Already messy," Hawthorne replied quietly. "You boys brought mess onto my property. Now you've got three options. Leave here, leave in cuffs when the sheriff arrives, or leave in bags. Your choice, but make it. Quick, my coffee's getting cold inside." The young rider gasped as Hawthorne's grip tightened slightly. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he managed to choke out. "When Reeves hears about this—" "Marcus Reeves," Hawthorne cut him off. "Former Force Recon. Specialized in advanced reconnaissance and tactical operations, discharged in 2019 under classified circumstances involving civilian casualties in Kandahar. Transformed the Scarlet Riders from standard motorcycle gang into paramilitary organization, currently wanted in connection with operations in Nevada and Idaho." His voice carried the same tone he'd once used briefing special operations teams. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" The other riders exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the frail old rancher they'd expected to intimidate. Everything about him had changed. His stance, his voice, even the air of authority he projected. They were looking at someone who had complete control of the situation and knew it. "Stand down," the older rider finally ordered, lowering his weapon. "Back to town. Boss needs to know about this." Hawthorne released the young rider with a subtle move that sent him stumbling toward his motorcycle. "Tell Reeves he's in over. His head," he called after them as they mounted up. "Smart play would be to move on, find easier targets. This valley's not what you think it is." As the riders retreated in a cloud of dust, Hawthorne allowed himself a small smile. Through his hidden surveillance system, he watched them regroup at the valley entrance, their body language showing clear agitation as they reported back to Reeves. The game was now in motion, exactly as he'd planned. Inside his house, he moved to the hidden room that held his equipment. The wall of monitors showed the Scarlet Riders' positions throughout the valley, their movements tracked by surveillance systems far more sophisticated than anything they'd expect to find in a small Wyoming town. On one screen, he pulled up the dossier he'd compiled on Reeves and his operation. 20 years of patience were about to pay off. Take a quick break and let us know what you think will happen next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Shadow Creek Valley as Sheriff Mike Randall's patrol car wound its way up the dirt road to Hawthorne's ranch. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread through town like wildfire, transforming the quiet old rancher into something of a legend in the span of a few hours. May's diner had been buzzing with increasingly elaborate versions of the story, each telling making Hawthorne sound more formidable than the last. Randall found Hawthorne on his front porch, calmly cleaning what appeared to be an ancient Winchester rifle. The elderly demeanor was back in place, hands trembling slightly as they worked the cleaning rod. But now Randall noticed what he'd missed before. The precision in those movements, the way Hawthorne's eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, the subtle signs of someone who'd spent a lifetime in combat situations. Quite a story going. "Around town," Randall said, settling into the porch's other chair. "Bill Henderson's boy swears you took down 5 armed men single-handed." Hawthorne's weathered face showed the ghost of a smile. "Stories tend to grow in the telling," he replied softly. "Just a misunderstanding with some visitors who didn't know proper manners." "Those visitors have taken over the Pine Creek Motel," Randall informed him. 23 of them at last count, all heavily armed. Reeves has been asking questions about you in town. Interesting questions. Inside the ranch house, hidden monitors showed the Scarlet Riders' movements throughout the valley. Hawthorne had watched them establish observation points, set up communications, begin what they thought was reconnaissance of the area. They were professional, he had to give them that. But they were operating blind, unaware that every move they made was being recorded, analyzed, and factored into plans laid down years before they arrived. "Should see what's in his basement," a new voice called out. Emma Chen, the town's librarian and unofficial historian, climbed the porch steps with surprising agility for her 65 years. She carried a thick folder of documents, her face showing the excitement of someone who'd just solved a complex puzzle. "Been going through old county records. This property's history is fascinating." Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Emma spread her documents across the porch railing, pointing to various maps and deeds. Ranch was bought 20 years ago through a series of shell companies. Final owner listed as a corporation based in Delaware. But here's where it gets interesting. The purchase included very specific parcels of land, creating a perfect, overlapping coverage of every major approach to the valley. "Been meaning to ask about that," Randall added. "Those ridges you own? They're exactly where someone would need to be to control access to the entire valley, almost like it was planned that way." Hawthorne set down the Winchester. "It's cleaning, forgotten. Some things are better left unexamined, Sheriff." But Emma was on a roll now, her historian's instincts fully engaged. Property records show unusual improvements. Underground power lines, satellite installations disguised as farm equipment, water systems far more extensive than a cattle ranch would need. And the timing. You arrived here right after the Spencer Canyon incident. The name hung in the air like gunsmoke. The Spencer Canyon incident had been headline news 20 years ago. A classified military operation gone wrong, resulting in multiple casualties and the disappearance of America's most legendary sniper. The government had buried the details, so deep that even the sniper's name had been redacted from public records. "Sometimes people just want a quiet place to retire," Hawthorne said softly. But his eyes had grown distant, seeing something far beyond the valley. Inside the ranch house, behind carefully concealed panels, lay the truth of Shadow Creek Valley's strategic importance. Maps showed its location relative to major smuggling routes, its potential as a distribution hub for criminal operations moving product between Canada and the American Southwest. Hawthorne had chosen this place, knowing that sooner or later someone would recognize its value. He'd spent 20 years preparing for that inevitability. In his hidden command center, monitors showed the Scarlet Riders' latest movements. They were good, setting up observation posts with professional precision, establishing communications networks, beginning what they thought was covert surveillance of the ranch. On one screen, facial recognition software quietly identified former military personnel among their ranks, force recon, rangers, even a few special forces operators. Reeves had built himself a serious paramilitary force. "Got something else?" Emma continued, pulling out an old newspaper clipping. 20 years ago, right before you arrived, there was a series of land purchases throughout Wyoming, all through shell companies, all in strategic locations. This ranch wasn't just a random choice, it's part of something bigger. Randall studied the documents with growing concern. These positions, they could control movement through half the state if someone wanted to, almost like Like someone was preparing for a war, Emma finished, setting up strategic positions years in advance. Hawthorne's voice carried a new edge when he finally spoke. Sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to be so well prepared that no one dares start one. The sheriff's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, got reports of more vehicles entering the valley. 3 black SUVs, looks military grade, moving fast and professional." "Reeves called in reinforcements," Randall said grimly. "Whatever's coming, it's going to be big." Hawthorne stood slowly, maintaining his elderly facade despite the tension in the air. "Might want to head back to town, Sheriff. Things are about to get interesting up here." As Randall and Emma reluctantly departed, Hawthorne moved to his command center. The monitors showed the new arrivals. Professional operators by their movement patterns, probably former special operations personnel. Reeves was escalating, just as Hawthorne had anticipated. The pieces were moving into place, a chess game 20 years in the making. In a hidden safe, behind layers of security that would have impressed military installations, lay the full truth of Thomas Hawthorne's identity. The documents inside told the story of a legend, America's deadliest sniper, a man whose confirmed kills had set records that remained classified. More importantly, they revealed why he'd chosen this valley, this moment, this particular confrontation. The Scarlet Riders were about to learn that they hadn't just threatened an old rancher. They'd walked into a trap 20 years in the making. Take a moment to like and subscribe. More incredible stories are coming your way tomorrow. Marcus. Reeves sat in the Pine Creek Motel's largest room, transformed now into a makeshift command center, studying satellite images of Hawthorne's ranch on a high-end laptop. 20 years of combat experience told him something wasn't adding up. The property's layout, the strategic positioning, the old man's reaction to his men, all of it suggested they'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple land grab. "Run it again," he ordered the former intelligence operative he'd brought in. "Everything we have on Thomas Hawthorne." Jake Morrison, who'd once analyzed targets for Delta Force before joining the Scarlet Riders, pulled up his findings. On paper, he's clean. Bought the ranch 20 years ago, keeps to himself, pays his taxes. But there are gaps, big ones. No military record under that name, no employment history before moving here, nothing to explain his combat training. Through the motel window, Reeves watched his men fortifying positions throughout Carson's Ridge. They were good operators, hand-picked for their military experience and loyalty. But something about their morning encounter with Hawthorne had shaken them. The young rider who'd confronted him, a former Marine with multiple combat tours, still couldn't explain exactly how the old man had disarmed him so efficiently. "Found something interesting," Morrison added, turning his laptop to show a series of property maps. His land purchases weren't random. Every parcel he owns overlooks a potential approach to the valley. Perfect fields of fire, pre-sighted positions. Not this is military-grade tactical planning. Reeves studied the maps with growing concern. The ranch's position suddenly looked less like a retirement property and more like a prepared battleground. What about the timing? When did he arrive here? "That's where it gets interesting," Morrison replied. "He showed up right after the Spencer Canyon incident. You remember that one? Classified op gone bad, multiple casualties, America's top. Sniper disappeared afterward." The name triggered something in Reeves' memory. He'd been a young Force Recon Marine when the Spencer Canyon story broke. The details had been classified, but rumors had circulated through special operations communities about a legendary marksman who discovered something he wasn't supposed to see, something big enough to make him disappear. "Get me everything." "On Spencer Canyon," Reeves ordered, "and put our best surveillance teams on the ranch. I want to know every move the old man makes." At that moment, across town, Hawthorne sat in May's diner, apparently focused on his evening coffee. Through carefully concealed devices, he monitored the Scarlet Riders' communications, listening as they coordinated surveillance positions. Their radio discipline was good, their codes professional, but they didn't realize every transmission was being recorded, analyzed, and added to his growing intelligence file. May approached his table, coffee pot in hand. Her movements were casual, but her voice was tight with concern. "They're setting up some kind of operation center at the motel," she reported quietly. "Fancy equipment, lots of security. Sarah Martinez says they've got men watching every road into town." Hawthorne nodded slightly, appearing to any observer as nothing more than an elderly man grateful for a coffee refill, but his mind was cataloguing the information, updating plans laid down years before. The Scarlet Riders were following a predictable pattern: establish control of the town, set up surveillance, gather intelligence before making their main move. The diner's bell chimed as Marcus Reeves entered, flanked by two of his most experienced men. The evening regulars fell silent, watching as the imposing figure approached Hawthorne's table. This time, Reeves didn't bother with the pretense of politeness. "Mind if we have a real conversation?" he asked, settling his bulk into the chair opposite Hawthorne. "No more games, no more pretending we don't both know what's really happening here." Hawthorne's hands maintained their slight tremor as he set down his coffee cup. "Nothing happening here except an old man trying to enjoy his evening coffee." Reeves leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet intensity that only Hawthorne could hear. "Spencer Canyon, 2003, classified operation targeting international arms dealers. Something went wrong, bad enough that someone tried to bury every record of what happened, and America's greatest sniper vanished without a trace." For the first time, Hawthorne's eyes met Reeves directly, all pretense of age momentarily forgotten. The look in those pale blue eyes made Reeves' combat instincts scream warnings. He was seeing what precious few people had lived to remember: the gaze of a man who'd made impossible shots in 3 wars, who'd changed the course of battles from distances that defied military doctrine. "Interesting story," Hawthorne replied softly. "Might want to be careful where you tell it. Some stories are better left buried." "This valley's perfect for our operation," Reeves continued, recovering his composure. "Strategic location, minimal law enforcement presence, access to major transport routes. We're not leaving. Question is, are you going to be reasonable, or do we need to handle this the hard way?" Hawthorne's response was almost too quiet to hear. Already chosen the hard way, just don't know it yet. Outside the diner's windows, more Scarlet Riders were taking up positions throughout town. Their movements showed clear tactical training, but to Hawthorne's experienced eye, they were positioning themselves exactly where he'd predicted they would. Every position they thought provided tactical advantage had been pre-sighted years ago. Every line of sight already calculated and accounted for. "Last chance," Reeves stated, standing to his full height. "Be smart about this. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you can do, I've got 30 trained operators and more coming. You're one man, way past his prime." Hawthorne's weathered face showed the ghost of a smile. "Numbers don't matter much past 1,000 yards. Never have." The threat, delivered in his quiet, aged voice, carried enough authority to make Reeves's hand twitch instinctively toward his concealed weapon. But Hawthorne had already turned back to his coffee, once again every bit the frail old rancher. As Reeves and his men departed, May approached Hawthorne's table. "They're really not going to leave, are they?" "No," Hawthorne replied softly. "But then, I've spent 20 years making sure they wouldn't want to." Take a quick break and tell us what you think happens next. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. Emma Chen sat in the back room of Carson's Ridge Public Library, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and county records. 20 years of professional curiosity. had never led her to dig this deep into the valley's history, but something about Hawthorne's ranch had triggered her researcher's instincts. The property records had been just the beginning. There was a pattern here, hidden beneath layers of carefully crafted normalcy. "Found something you need to see," she told Sheriff Randall over the phone. "Remember those shell companies that bought Hawthorne's property? They didn't just buy land here. There's a whole network of strategic positions across 3 states, all purchased within months of the Spencer Canyon incident." Randall arrived at the library 15 minutes later, coffee in hand, his face showing the strain of monitoring the Scarlet Riders' growing presence in his town. Emma spread her findings across the reading table. Maps, property records, corporate filings, all connected by red strings in a web of connections that grew more complex by the hour. "Look at this," she pointed to a satellite map. "Every property in the network overlooks major transport routes, potential landing strips, possible smuggling paths. It's not just our valley. Someone created an entire surveillance network disguised as random land purchases." Randall studied the documents with growing concern. This is professional work, military-grade strategic planning. But why here? Why wait 20 years? "Because he was waiting for them," a new voice spoke from the doorway. May stood there, still wearing her diner apron, holding a worn leather logbook. "Found this behind the diner's old storage cabinet. Think Hawthorne meant for me to find it." The logbook's pages revealed meticulous notes, spanning 2 decades, surveillance reports, movement patterns of various criminal organizations, detailed analyses of potential threats to the valley. The handwriting was precise, showing none of the tremor that characterized Hawthorne's current public persona. "Listen to this entry from 15 years ago," May read aloud. "Criminal operations expanding north from Nevada. Pattern suggests eventual push into Wyoming. Key transport corridors make Shadow Creek Valley inevitable target. Estimated timeline 15-20 years. He didn't just predict the Scarlet Riders, Emma realized. He chose this valley because he knew someone like them would eventually try to take it. Everything, the ranch, the property purchases, the surveillance network, it was all preparation for this moment. Through the library's windows, they could see more Scarlet Riders patrolling the streets of Carson's Ridge. Reeves had established checkpoints at key intersections, his men maintaining a professional but intimidating presence. The town was being slowly locked down, yet somehow this felt like part of a plan laid down years before any of them arrived. At his ranch, Hawthorne watched the situation unfold through his network of hidden cameras. Reeves had positioned his men well, showing the tactical expertise that had made him a legend in force recon. But every position they took had been anticipated, every move catalogued and counted in plans developed over decades of patient preparation. His secure computer displayed an encrypted message from an old contact. "Package located. Spencer Canyon files deeper than suspected. Multiple agencies involved. Watch your back. This goes higher than Reeves." In town, Jake Morrison continued his investigation into Hawthorne's background, growing more uneasy with each discovery. "Boss," he reported to Reeves, "found something in sealed military archives. Spencer Canyon wasn't just a failed operation, it was a cover-up. Someone high up was running an unauthorized program, using military resources for private operations." Reeves studied the encrypted files Morrison had acquired. "And our quiet rancher discovered it?" "More than that," Morrison replied. "He was their best operative, a sniper so good his real numbers are still classified. But something went wrong. Official record says he died in the canyon, but dead men don't buy ranches," Reeves finished, "or spend 20 years building elaborate traps." The pieces were coming together, revealing a picture that made even hardened combat veterans uneasy. Thomas Hawthorne hadn't just disappeared after Spencer Canyon. He'd gone to ground with a purpose, choosing Shadow Creek Valley as the perfect location for a confrontation he'd spent 20 years preparing for. At the library, Emma made another discovery that sent chills down her spine. The shell companies that bought the properties? They all trace back to a holding corporation established one day after the Spencer Canyon incident. Its registration number, she paused, double-checking her findings. It's a set of coordinates. Randall pulled up the coordinates on his phone. That's Spencer Canyon. May studied the old logbook's final pages. There's more. Last entry. Reads. They'll come looking eventually. Too much profit potential to ignore. When they do, everything else comes to light. Spencer Canyon was just the beginning. The sheriff's radio crackled with reports of more vehicles entering the valley, unmarked SUVs with government plates, moving with the precision of professional operators. The Scarlet Riders were no longer the only players in this deadly game. This isn't just about controlling the valley anymore, Emma realized. Hawthorne's using the Scarlet Riders to expose something bigger, something that started in Spencer Canyon 20 years ago. At his ranch, Hawthorne watched the new arrivals through his surveillance network. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd planned. The trap wasn't just for Reeves and his men. They were bait, drawing out bigger fish that had spent 20 years thinking their secrets were safely buried. Like all the best snipers, Hawthorne understood that patience was more than just a virtue. It was a weapon. For 20 years he'd waited, watched, and prepared. Now the pieces were finally in place, and the true scope of his operation was about to become clear. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The next part of this incredible story will leave you speechless. The truth arrived in Shadow Creek Valley on an encrypted hard drive, delivered to Sheriff Randall's office by a courier who disappeared before anyone could question him. The drive contained classified military files, mission reports, and photographs that shattered every assumption about the quiet old rancher who'd lived among them for 20 years. "My God," Emma whispered, staring at the documents displayed on the sheriff's computer. "It's him. He's the ghost." The ghost. Even hardened military veterans spoke that name with a mixture of awe and unease. For 15 years, from Vietnam through conflicts that remained classified, he'd rewritten the rules of what was possible with a rifle, confirmed kills at distances that defied military doctrine, shots that changed the course of battles, of entire operations. His real name had never appeared in official records, only the results of his work. 2,837 confirmed eliminations, Randall read from one heavily redacted report. Longest confirmed kill, 2,740 yards. That's over a mile and a half. May had joined them, bringing coffee and her own discoveries. "The logbook makes more sense now," she said, opening the worn volume. "These aren't just surveillance notes. They're shot calculations, wind patterns, detailed ballistic data for every approach to the valley." Through the office window, they could see Scarlet Riders patrolling the streets, professional operators who thought they had control of the situation. None of them realized they were moving through pre-calculated firing lanes, their positions mapped and ranged years before they arrived. At the Pine Creek Motel, Marcus Reeves received his own revelation about Hawthorne's identity. Jake Morrison burst into the command center, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, connecting a laptop to their secure network. "Just got access to sealed files from Spencer Canyon. The ghost wasn't just there, he was the target." The classified reports painted a disturbing picture. Spencer Canyon had been meant to eliminate a man who'd discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, something about unauthorized military operations and private contractors. But the ambush had failed spectacularly. Of the 30-man strike team sent to kill him, only 3 had survived. "The official report lists him as eliminated," Morrison continued. "But look at this after-action analysis. Target disappeared with extensive documentation. Possibility of future exposure remains significant threat." Reeves studied satellite images of Hawthorne's ranch with new understanding. He didn't just go into hiding, he realized. He spent 20 years building an elaborate trap, using this valley's strategic value to draw out the people behind Spencer Canyon. "We're not just dealing with some retired sniper," Morrison added grimly. "The Ghost wrote the book on long-range combat psychology. He doesn't just kill targets. He uses them to expose larger operations." In his ranch house, Hawthorne monitored their reactions through sophisticated surveillance equipment. The trembling hands and elderly shuffle were gone now, replaced by the fluid precision of a man who'd spent decades perfecting his craft. Through hidden cameras, he watched Reeves and his men realize the true nature of their situation. His secure computer displayed real-time data from sensors throughout the valley. The Scarlet Riders had established what they thought were defensive positions, not realizing they were positioning themselves exactly where he'd planned. More importantly, their presence was drawing attention from exactly the kind of people he'd spent 20 years waiting for. At the sheriff's office, Emma made another connection. The property network, the shell companies. He wasn't just creating observation posts. He was building a case. She spread out her maps, showing the larger pattern. Every position overlooks routes used by private military contractors, unofficial government operations. He's been documenting everything for 20 years. But why wait so long? Randall asked. Why not expose whatever he found at Spencer Canyon immediately? May understood first. Because he needed proof of ongoing operations. The Scarlet Riders aren't just another gang. They're connected to whatever he discovered 20 years ago. Look at their equipment, their training. Someone's backing them. Someone with serious resources. As if confirming her theory, new vehicles began arriving in the valley. Black SUVs with darkened windows, moving with the precision that screamed government operations. But they weren't any official agency. These were private contractors, the kind that handled problems quietly and permanently. Multiple teams, converging, Morrison reported to Reeves. These aren't regular operators. This is Ajax Security Group, high-end contractors, known for handling sensitive cleanup operations. Reeves felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. They're not here for us, he realized. They're here for him. We're just the bait that drew them out. At his ranch, Hawthorne received an encrypted message from an old contact. Ajax. Deployment confirmed. Original Spencer Canyon contractors. Primary target package. You and all documentation. Secondary target. Total deniability. They'll eliminate everyone who knows. The Ghost's legend had been built on more than just impossible shots. He was known for elaborate operations that used his target's own actions against them. Now, 20 years of patience were about to pay off. The trap wasn't just for the Scarlet Riders. They were simply the first layer of a much more complex operation. In town, the atmosphere grew tense as locals noticed the new arrivals. These weren't just bikers trying to take over their valley. Something bigger was happening, something that had been in motion since before most of them had even moved to Shadow Creek Valley. He protected us for 20 years, May said quietly, reading through more of the classified files. Not just from gangs and criminals. He chose this valley because he knew what was coming. He's been preparing us, all of us, for this moment. The legend of the Ghost was about to be reborn in Shadow Creek Valley. But this time, the target wasn't just a single objective. It was an entire system of corruption that had spent 20 years believing their secrets were safely buried. Take a break and tell us what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. The attack began at midnight, precisely as Hawthorne had predicted. The Scarlet Riders moved in formation up the winding road to his ranch, their motorcycles running dark, backed by tactical teams in blacked-out SUVs. Reeves had brought every operator he had, 35 combat-hardened men approaching from multiple angles, using terrain features for cover, executing a textbook tactical assault. From his hidden command center, Hawthorne watched them approach through thermal imaging displays. Their movement patterns showed extensive military training, but they were walking into firing lanes he'd spent 20 years perfecting. Every route they thought provided cover had been pre-sighted, every distance calculated down to the inch. "Primary teams in position," Reeves's voice crackled over their encrypted channel, which Hawthorne monitored easily. No movement from the house. Thermal showing one heat signature in the main bedroom, looking like an easy snatch and grab. Hawthorne allowed himself a small smile. The heat signature was a carefully calibrated decoy, one of dozens of countermeasures he'd prepared over the years. His real position was a reinforced bunker beneath the barn, filled with technology that would have impressed military intelligence agencies. In town, Sheriff Randall watched the operation unfold through high-powered binoculars from his office roof. "They're really going to try it," he muttered to May and Emma, who'd insisted on monitoring the situation. 30-plus armed men against one old rancher. "They still don't understand what they're dealing with," Emma replied, consulting the classified files they'd received. The Ghost never engaged in direct confrontation. He used his target's own tactics against them. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Scarlet Riders' communications suddenly failed. Their encrypted channels went dead, replaced by static. Night vision equipment malfunctioned. Thermal imaging devices showed bizarre false readings. Years of careful preparation had created a web of electronic warfare countermeasures throughout the valley. "Push forward," Reeves ordered, switching to hand signals. "Teams 1 and 2 breach the house, 3 and 4 secure the barn, 5 maintain perimeter." They were good, moving with the coordination that came from extensive combat experience. But Hawthorne had planned for this moment with an attention to detail that bordered on artistic. As the teams approached their objectives, hidden sensors triggered a sequence of events 20 years in the making. The first shot came from over 2,000 yards away, a distance most snipers would consider impossible in daylight, let alone at night. The bullet took out Team 1's pointman's weapon with surgical precision, the impact sending it spinning away into the darkness. Before anyone could react, 3 more shots disabled weapons across the assault force. "Contact!" "Team," 2's leader shouted. "Can't get a fix on position." Another shot rang out, this one spanning nearly a mile and a half, threading between 2 approaching riders to impact a tree exactly between them. The message was clear. These weren't warning shots. Every bullet was placed precisely where the Ghost wanted it. "Fall back," Reeves ordered, but even retreat had been accounted for. Hidden charges detonated across the landscape, not explosive devices, but specialized units that filled the air with dense smoke, disrupting night vision and thermal imaging. The attacking force found themselves scattered, disoriented, their carefully planned assault turning into chaos. In his command center, Hawthorne moved with fluid precision between firing positions he'd prepared years in advance. Each shot was calculated to demoralize and divide, separating the attackers into pre-designated zones of control. Not a single round was meant to kill. This was about sending a message. "He's not just defending!" Morrison's voice carried panic over the few radio channels still working. "He's herding us, using pre-planned fields of fire to control our movement." Reeves, a combat veteran who'd seen action across 3 continents, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night. Air. This wasn't just tactical superiority, this was an art form, the work of someone who'd spent decades perfecting every aspect of long-range combat. Through sophisticated optics, Hawthorne watched the Ajax security teams holding position at the valley's edge. They were waiting to see how the Scarlet Riders fared, gathering intelligence for their own eventual assault. Their presence confirmed everything. These were the same contractors from Spencer Canyon, the same organizations he'd spent 20 years preparing to expose. Another sequence of shots rang out, each one placed with impossible precision. Vehicles were disabled, communications equipment destroyed, escape routes cut off. The Ghost was systematically dismantling a superior force without taking a single life, demonstrating a level of skill that would become legendary in special operations communities. "This is your only warning," Hawthorne's voice suddenly came, through their disabled radio channels, calm and measured, showing none of the elderly quaver he'd affected for so long. "The next demonstration won't be so gentle. Leave my valley while you can still walk out." From their observation post in town, May watched the Scarlet Riders' assault collapse with startling efficiency. "I've never seen anything like this," Randall breathed, witnessing shooting that defied his understanding of what was possible with a rifle. "This is why they called him the Ghost," Emma explained, reading from the classified files. "He doesn't just defeat enemies, he demoralizes them, makes them question everything they thought they knew about their own capabilities." The night ended with the Scarlet Riders in full retreat, their confidence shattered, their tactical superiority proven meaningless against an opponent who'd spent 20 years preparing for this exact confrontation. But as Reeves and his men regrouped at the motel, they realized this had never been about them at all. "We're not the target," Reeves told Morrison as they assessed their losses. "We're the bait. He wanted us to try this, wanted to draw attention to the valley. The real question is, who is he really after?" At his ranch, Hawthorne was already preparing for the next phase. The Ajax teams would come next, better equipped and better informed, but ultimately following the same predictable patterns. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd planned, each piece falling into place in an operation 20 years in the making. Take a quick break and let us know what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. The morning after the failed assault, Shadow Creek Valley hummed with tension. The Scarlet Riders had withdrawn to the Pine Creek Motel, their confidence shattered by the previous night's demonstration. But something more dangerous was brewing. The Ajax security teams had moved closer, establishing observation posts in the hills surrounding the valley. These weren't just ordinary contractors. They were cleanup specialists, men who erased problems and buried secrets. In his command center, Hawthorne received an encrypted message from a contact he hadn't heard from in 2 decades. "Ajax deployment authorized by Phoenix. Spencer Canyon protocols activated. They're burning everything." Phoenix. The name triggered memories of that night in Spencer Canyon, of documents he was never meant to see, of a shadow organization using military resources for private operations. He'd spent 20 years gathering evidence, building a case that would expose not just individual operations, but an entire system of corruption. At the sheriff's office, Emma made a breakthrough that changed everything. "Look at this," she told Randall, spreading out documentation from her research. "Ajax Security Group isn't just connected to Spencer Canyon, they're a front company. Their corporate structure traces back to a private military consortium called Phoenix International." Randall studied the documents with growing concern. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than anyone imagined," May answered, entering with fresh coffee and more revelations from Hawthorne's logbook. These entries go back 20 years. He wasn't just tracking local criminal operations, he was mapping an entire network. Private military contractors, corrupt officials, black operations disguised as corporate security. Through his surveillance network, Hawthorne watched Ajax teams establishing their positions. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, their movements showing the kind of training that only came from top-tier special operations backgrounds. But they were following patterns he'd studied for decades, setting up exactly as he'd predicted they would. At the motel, Reeves received a visitor, a man in an expensive suit who moved with the calculated precision of someone used to operating in shadows. "Nicholas Drake," he introduced himself smoothly. "Phoenix International, we need to discuss your recent encounter with the rancher." Reeves studied Drake carefully, noting the subtle signs of extensive combat experience beneath the corporate exterior. "You knew who he was," he realized. "You knew he was here." "We've been monitoring the situation," Drake admitted. "Your organization's expansion provided an opportunity to resolve a long-standing security concern. Unfortunately, your assault force's performance was less than optimal." "Less than optimal?" Morrison interjected bitterly. "He played us like amateurs. Everything we tried, every approach, he'd prepared for it all years in advance." Drake's smile never reached his eyes. "Which is precisely why we're taking over the operation. You've served your purpose, Mr. Reeves. The Ghost is now fully engaged, his attention focused on defending his territory. That makes him vulnerable." In town, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Emma discovered financial records showing Phoenix International's connections to shadow banking operations, arms deals, and private military operations across 3 continents. The Scarlet Riders had been just one piece of a much larger organization. "They're deleting records," she reported urgently. "Corporate files, military documents, everything connected to Spencer Canyon, it's all being systematically erased." Hawthorne had anticipated this too. For 20 years, he'd maintained secure servers around the world, storing encrypted copies of every document, every connection, every piece of evidence he'd gathered. The truth about Spencer Canyon, about Phoenix, about all of it, was safely preserved where they couldn't reach it. Through his surveillance systems, he observed new vehicles arriving in the valley. These weren't ordinary military contractors. The equipment being unloaded spoke of a level of operation far beyond anything the Scarlet Riders had attempted. Electronic warfare units, advanced surveillance systems, tactical equipment that shouldn't have been available to private organizations. "Full tactical team deployment," Drake informed someone on a secure line. "Maximum force authorized. Containment protocols in effect for the entire valley. No witnesses, no evidence, no loose ends." In his command center, Hawthorne watched the pieces falling into place. Phoenix was committing significant resources, drawing more of their operation into the open than they had in decades. Everything he'd planned for 20 years was approaching its climax. At the diner, May served coffee to locals watching the new arrivals with growing unease. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," she told Randall and Emma. "Whatever's coming, it's bigger than anything this valley's ever seen." "Because they're desperate," Emma realized, studying more of her findings. "Hawthorne hasn't just been gathering evidence about Spencer Canyon. He's documented 20 years of unauthorized operations, black budgets, connections to official agencies. If this gets out, it brings down more than just Phoenix," Randall finished. "It exposes an entire shadow system of private military operations." On his secure channels, Hawthorne received confirmation that his final preparations were complete. Hidden cameras showed Ajax teams establishing firing positions, coordinating with Phoenix operators, preparing for what they thought would be an overwhelming assault. None of them realized they were positioning themselves exactly where he'd spent 20 years preparing to face them. In his command center, Hawthorne made the last preparations for what was to come. His hidden cameras showed Phoenix operators moving into precisely the positions he'd prepared for, their electronic warfare units deploying exactly where he'd anticipated. 20 years of patience were about to pay off. "Remember what I taught you," he told Randall through their secure channel. "When it starts, stay low, protect the townspeople, let them think they have control of the situation." Emma's research had revealed the full scope of what they were facing. "Phoenix has connections to 3 federal agencies," she reported. "Black budgets, unauthorized operations, private military actions using government resources. What Hawthorne found at Spencer Canyon, it was just the beginning. Around the valley, Phoenix teams established their final positions. Their night vision equipment showed no movement from the ranch. Their thermal imaging revealed no heat signatures. Their electronic warfare systems detected no active communications. Everything suggested they had achieved complete tactical superiority. That illusion was exactly what Hawthorne had spent 20 years creating. Take a quick break and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe because the next part will change everything. As evening approached Shadow Creek Valley, Carson's Ridge bore little resemblance to the quiet town it had been just days ago. Phoenix operators moved through the streets with military precision, establishing control points and surveillance positions. But something else was happening. A transformation 20 years in the making, as the townspeople began implementing protocols Hawthorne had carefully embedded in the community's routine. May's Diner had become a hub of coordinated resistance, its basement transformed into an impromptu command center. Through the years, Hawthorne had quietly prepared key members of the community for this moment, building a network that could activate when needed. "Remember what Thomas taught us," May told her staff as they served coffee to Phoenix operators while carefully documenting their movements. Every conversation, every position they take, every piece of equipment they bring in, record all of it. Throughout town, similar scenes played out. Bill Henderson's hardware store staff noted serial numbers of military-grade equipment being unloaded. Sarah Martinez's veterinary clinic became a surveillance post, its elevated position providing clear views of Phoenix's deployment patterns. Even the local church's bell tower had been subtly modified years ago to house sophisticated monitoring equipment. "It's incredible," Emma told Randall, as they coordinated the town's response. "He didn't just prepare the valley physically. He trained the entire community without them even knowing it. Every habit he encouraged, every routine he established, it was all preparation for this." Through his surveillance network, Hawthorne watched his years of careful groundwork bear fruit. The townspeople moved with practiced efficiency, maintaining their daily routines while gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable. Every piece of evidence they collected was automatically uploaded to secure servers around the world, building an ironclad case against Phoenix and their operations. At the Pine Creek Motel, Drake received reports that should have troubled him more than they did. "Sir, we're detecting unusual patterns in civilian behavior," his intelligence officer reported. "The locals seem too organized, too purposeful in their movements." "They're small-town civilians," Drake dismissed the concern. "Focus on the primary target. The ghost is what matters. Everything else is collateral." But Reeves, watching from the periphery with his Scarlet Riders, recognized something his Phoenix superiors missed. "They're not acting scared," he told Morrison. "Look at them. Every movement has purpose. Every position they take gives them clear lines of sight. The old man's been training them for years." In the diner's basement, May accessed a hidden compartment Hawthorne had installed decades ago, revealing communications equipment that would have impressed military intelligence agencies. "Channel 7 active," she reported through their secure network. Phoenix deployed electronic warfare units exactly where he predicted. The transformation extended beyond just gathering intelligence. Key positions throughout town had been subtly prepared over the years. The old grain silos, seemingly decorative weather vane, contained sophisticated signal monitoring equipment. The renovations to the town hall's roof 5 years ago had included the installation of concealed observation posts. Every improvement project, every renovation, Emma realized, reviewing town records. He used them to build a sophisticated surveillance network. The whole town is designed to monitor and document everything that happens here. The Ghost's legend had been built on more than just impossible shots. His greatest operations had always involved turning his enemy's strength against them. using their own tactics and resources to expose larger truths. Now, in Shadow Creek Valley, 20 years of patience were about to pay off in ways none of them expected. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The next part of this incredible story will leave you breathless. Nicholas Drake stood in the makeshift command center at the Pine Creek Motel, studying tactical displays showing Shadow Creek Valley's terrain. Phoenix International had deployed their best assets, 4 tactical teams of former Tier 1 operators, electronic warfare specialists, and surveillance experts. The operation had drawn more resources than anything they'd mounted since Spencer Canyon, but Drake understood the stakes. 20 years of secrets were at risk. Full-spectrum electronic warfare coverage, his technical chief reported. Whatever surveillance systems he's using will blind them. Thermal imaging, night vision, communications, we control it all. Drake knew better. The Ghost's reputation hadn't been built on technology, but on an almost supernatural ability to anticipate and counter his opponent's every move. Even now, watching his teams establish what should have been overwhelming tactical superiority, Drake felt the unsettling certainty that they were doing exactly what Hawthorne wanted. At his ranch, Hawthorne made final adjustments to systems that had waited 20 years for this moment. His surveillance network showed Phoenix deploying in textbook fashion, establishing overlapping fields of fire, positioning electronic warfare units to disable his communications, setting up containment teams to control potential escape routes. They're following the same protocols, he told May through a secure channel he'd established years ago. Same tactical doctrine they used at Spencer Canyon. They haven't learned. May, coordinating with Emma and Sheriff Randall from the diner's basement, studied the incoming data. More vehicles arriving, she reported. Military-grade equipment, some of it restricted to official agencies. How did private contractors get access to this level of hardware? The answer came from Emma's continued research. Phoenix isn't just a private military company, she explained, showing them documents she'd uncovered. They're a front for something bigger. Look at these connections. Defense contracts, classified operations, black budgets hidden inside legitimate military spending. Through his surveillance systems, Hawthorne watched Reeves and his Scarlet Riders being pushed to the valley's periphery. Phoenix was taking complete control, establishing the kind of operation that shouldn't have existed outside official military channels. Their presence confirmed everything he'd discovered at Spencer Canyon, an organization using military resources for private operations, accountable to no one. Target packages distributed, Drake's tactical commander reported. 4 primary teams, coordinated assault. No witnesses, no evidence. Valley goes dark at 2300 hours. But Hawthorne had prepared for this exact scenario. Throughout the valley, hidden systems waited to be activated. Every position Phoenix thought provided tactical advantage had been compromised years ago. Their electronic warfare equipment would find itself targeting phantom signatures, while their communications were monitored and recorded. In town, Sheriff Randall received an encrypted delivery, detailed evidence of Phoenix's operations, connections to government agencies, financial records showing billions in misappropriated funds. Insurance, the attached note read in Hawthorne's precise handwriting, in case things don't go as planned. He's not just fighting them, Emma realized, studying the documents. He's forcing them to deploy resources, commit personnel, create evidence of their existence. Everything happening in the valley right now, it's all being documented. May understood the deeper strategy. That's why he waited 20 years. He needed them to think he was vulnerable, to commit enough resources that they couldn't deny their involvement. The Ghost isn't just planning a battle, he's building a case. Through secure channels, Hawthorne monitored Phoenix's communications. Their confidence was their weakness, their belief in overwhelming force, blinding them to the trap they were walking into. Every piece of equipment they deployed, every operator they committed, every order given, all of it was being recorded, creating an undeniable record of their unauthorized operations. "Final teams in position," Drake's command channel crackled, awaiting authorization for full valley containment. Hawthorne's voice came through their secure channel, still carrying the quiet authority that had earned him his legend. "Phase 2 beginning," he informed them. "They'll start electronic suppression soon. Switch to backup systems as planned." Right on cue, Phoenix activated their electronic warfare equipment. Cell phones went dead, internet connections failed, and normal radio communications ceased. But the town's hidden network, built piece by piece over 20 years, continued, functioning exactly as designed. "Sir," Drake's technical chief reported with growing concern, "we're detecting residual signals we can't trace. Something's still active, but we can't pinpoint the source." The townspeople continued their carefully choreographed movements, each person playing their part in Hawthorne's elaborate plan. The local teenagers who'd grown up with his subtle training disguised as summer jobs and community projects proved especially effective. They moved through town on skateboards and bikes, appearing to be typical kids while gathering crucial intelligence on Phoenix's positions. "Check the hardware they're unloading," young Tommy Fletcher reported through a secure channel hidden in his headphones. "Some of it has military serial numbers, restricted equipment that shouldn't be in private hands." Dr. Bennett's clinic staff, trained over years to notice and record details under the guise of medical observation, documented the operator's movements and equipment. "Multiple teams showing signs of recent overseas deployment," they reported. "Equipment configurations match classified military protocols." As night approached, Phoenix's confidence in their technical superiority began showing cracks. Their electronic warfare systems reported complete suppression of local communications, yet somehow the town seemed to be coordinating its activities with unsettling precision. "Something's wrong," Morrison told Reeves as they watched from their designated position. "Look at their movements. Everyone knows exactly where to be, exactly what to do. This isn't just civilian cooperation. This is military-grade coordination." In his command center, Hawthorne monitored the situation with satisfaction. Phoenix had committed significant resources to this operation, drawing more of their personnel and equipment into the open than they had in decades. Every piece of restricted military hardware, every classified protocol they employed, every operator they deployed, all of it was being meticulously documented by a town that had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The next part of this incredible story will leave you speechless. Phoenix launched their assault at midnight, exactly as Hawthorne had predicted. 4 tactical teams moved on his ranch from different directions, their night vision equipment and thermal imaging systems providing what they thought was perfect battlefield awareness. Behind them, electronic warfare units maintained what they believed was complete communications suppression across the valley. "All teams in position," Drake's voice crackled over their secure channel. "Begin primary assault phase. Remember, no witnesses, no evidence. Everything burns." Through his sophisticated surveillance system, Hawthorne watched them advance into carefully prepared kill zones. 2 decades of patience had taught him every shadow in the valley, every angle, every possible approach. The Phoenix operators were good. Their movement patterns, showing the kind of training that came from top-tier special operations backgrounds, but they were fighting on ground that had been prepared for them long before they arrived. "They're deploying exactly as expected," he informed May through their hidden communications network. "Time to show them what this town can really do." The first sign that something was wrong came when Phoenix's electronic warfare systems began showing conflicting readings. Phantom heat signatures appeared and disappeared across their tactical displays, making it impossible to track potential targets. Their night vision equipment revealed mysterious light sources that shouldn't have existed. Multiple anomalies, the technical chief reported to Drake. Can't get clean readings on any spectrum. Something's interfering with our systems. In town, the counter-operation swung into action. 20 years of preparation had created a community capable of coordinated resistance that Phoenix never saw coming. Bill Henderson's hardware store crew activated jamming devices hidden in seemingly ordinary construction equipment. Dr. Bennett's clinic staff deployed specialized equipment concealed in medical machinery. Phase 1 active, May reported. From the diner's basement command center, all monitoring stations reporting successful electronic countermeasures. And the Phoenix assault teams found themselves operating virtually blind. Their sophisticated equipment, supposedly the best money could buy, proved useless against countermeasures Hawthorne had spent years developing. But the real surprise came from the town itself. Every streetlight in Carson's Ridge suddenly activated, their positioning carefully calculated over years of subtle infrastructure improvements. The sudden illumination destroyed the operators' night vision advantage, exposing their positions to carefully placed observers throughout the town. "What the hell?" Drake demanded as reports flooded in. "Who are these people? This is supposed to be a simple civilian population." But Hawthorne had long since transformed Carson's Ridge into something far more formidable. The townspeople moved, with practiced efficiency, implementing protocols they'd rehearsed for years without even knowing it. Every community event, every emergency drill, every renovation project had been preparation for this moment. The first shots came from Hawthorne himself, demonstrating why he'd been legendary long before most of these operators had joined the military. From positions he'd prepared years in advance, he systematically disabled Phoenix's electronic warfare, vehicles with precision fire at distances that seemed impossible. "Shots fired," Team 1's leader reported. "Can't locate source. Distance has to be over 2,000 yards. More shots rang out, each one perfectly placed to disable equipment, rather than personnel. Hawthorne wasn't just fighting, he was creating evidence. Every piece of restricted military hardware he disabled, every classified system he exposed, added to the documentation of Phoenix's illegal operations. "Pull back to secondary positions," Drake ordered, but even their retreat routes had been anticipated. The town's hidden network of sensors and cameras recorded everything, building an ironclad case with every move they made. In the diner's basement, Emma coordinated with observers throughout town. "They're falling back exactly as he predicted," she reported, moving into the containment zones. The containment zones were areas Hawthorne had prepared specifically. For this purpose, places where Phoenix's movements would be most visible, most easily documented. Every piece of evidence they created was automatically uploaded to secure servers worldwide, ensuring that the truth about their operation couldn't be buried. "Sir," Morrison reported to Reeves as they watched from their designated observation post, "this isn't just tactical superiority. The whole valley's been turned into one giant trap. Every move we make, every piece of equipment we deploy, it's all being recorded." Hawthorne's voice suddenly came through Phoenix's supposedly secure communications network, carrying the quiet authority that had made him a legend. 20 years, he told them. 20 years preparing this valley, training these people, waiting for you to make exactly these mistakes. Every piece of restricted military hardware you brought in, every classified protocol you've employed, it's all documented now. The truth about Spencer Canyon, about Phoenix, about all of it. It's already being uploaded to servers you can't reach. Drake realized too late the true nature of their situation. They hadn't just walked into a tactical trap, they'd exposed their entire operation, providing irrefutable evidence of everything Hawthorne had discovered 20 years ago. "Shut it down," Drake ordered desperately. Pull all teams back. Initiate scorched earth protocols. But even their containment procedures had been anticipated. The town's hidden network continued recording and transmitting everything, building a case that would expose not just this operation, but 2 decades of unauthorized military activities. "Remember what you taught us about patience," May's voice came through their secure channel, carrying a hint of satisfaction. "Sometimes the best victory is letting your enemy defeat themselves. Take a quick break and tell us what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way." In the aftermath of Phoenix's failed assault, Nicholas Drake paced the motel's command center, his carefully maintained corporate facade cracking under pressure. The operation was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated, but it wasn't just tactical failure that troubled him. It was the growing certainty that the Ghost had outmaneuvered them on every level. "Sir," Morrison reported, studying data from their remaining surveillance systems, "we've confirmed that everything is being recorded and transmitted. Every piece of equipment we brought in, every operator we deployed, it's all documented. But there's something else." Something in the pattern of his responses. Drake's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" "The shots he took, the positions he disabled, they're not random. He's specifically targeting equipment we shouldn't have. Military prototype systems, classified hardware. It's like he's building a case, piece by piece." At his ranch, Hawthorne reviewed the night's documentation through his command center's displays. Every engagement had been carefully planned, not just for tactical advantage, but for maximum exposure. Each shot had told a story, revealed a connection, exposed another layer of Phoenix's unauthorized operations. His secure computer displayed a message from an old contact. "Spencer Canyon. Files accessed. Original operation tied to Project Blacklight. Drake was there. He was the one who gave the kill order." The revelation hit Hawthorne like physical blow. 20 years ago, in Spencer Canyon, he'd discovered evidence of Project Blacklight, a classified program using military resources for private operations. The ambush that followed had cost him everything, forced him into hiding. Now, he finally knew who had made that decision. In town, Emma made her own breakthrough. "Look at this," she told Randall and May, spreading out documents from her research. "Drake's not just a Phoenix executive. 20 years ago, he was military intelligence, assigned to Project Blacklight, the same project Hawthorne discovered in Spencer Canyon." May studied the documents with growing understanding. "That's why he chose our valley, why he spent 20 years preparing. He wasn't just hiding. He was setting a trap for the people who tried to kill him." Through his surveillance network, Hawthorne watched Drake mobilizing his remaining forces. The Phoenix commander's movements showed growing desperation, the kind that came from realizing you weren't just facing defeat, but exposure of long-buried secrets. "Get me a secure line to command," Drake ordered his communications team. "We need containment authorization, full spectrum, no limitations." But even this had been anticipated. Hawthorne's hidden systems intercepted and recorded the transmission, adding another piece to the documentation that was already spreading across secure servers worldwide. "Found something else," Emma reported, her voice tight with discovery. Project Blacklight wasn't just about unauthorized operations. They were using military resources to protect private interests, corporations, criminal organizations, anyone who could pay. Spencer Canyon was just one operation in a 20-year pattern. In his command center, Hawthorne accessed files he'd spent 2 decades compiling. Each folder contained meticulously documented evidence, financial records, operation details, connections that linked Phoenix to dozens of classified programs. But the final folder, the one marked Spencer Canyon, contained something more personal, photographs of the family he'd lost when they tried to silence him. "Sir," Morrison told Drake, "You need to see this. We found his real file. The one that was supposed to be buried. He wasn't just any sniper. He was Project Blacklight's primary operator until he started asking questions," Drake finished grimly. "Until he found evidence that threatened everything we'd built. We thought we'd buried it all at Spencer Canyon, buried him with it. Instead, he spent 20 years building the perfect trap." Through town, Phoenix operators moved with increasing urgency, trying to contain a situation that had already spiraled beyond their control. But the town's hidden network continued recording everything, each movement adding to the evidence Hawthorne had spent years gathering. It was never just about exposing one operation, May realized, reading more from Hawthorne's logbook. He needed them to commit enough resources, deploy enough classified equipment that they couldn't deny their involvement. The whole valley was designed for this, to force them into the open. Hawthorne's voice came through their secure channel, carrying a weight of 20 years' patience. "Drake made a choice in Spencer Canyon," he told them, "chose to protect the system instead of the truth. Now he gets to watch that system tear itself apart." In the motel's command center, Drake received increasingly desperate messages from his superiors. The evidence Hawthorne had gathered wasn't just damaging, it was catastrophic. Project Blacklight, Phoenix's operations, 2 decades of unauthorized military activities, all of it was being exposed. "He's not trying to win a tactical victory," Reeves observed from his position with the Scarlet Riders. "He's dismantling their entire operation, piece by piece. Everything they do to stop him just creates more evidence against them." Through his surveillance systems, Hawthorne watched Drake's growing desperation with grim satisfaction. 20 years ago, this man had given the order that destroyed his life. Now he would watch as everything he'd built crumbled under the weight of exposed truth. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The next part of this incredible story will shock you. The dawn brought new tensions to Shadow Creek Valley as Phoenix's desperation became increasingly evident. 3 black military helicopters appeared on the horizon, their distinctive silhouettes marking a significant escalation. These weren't just any aircraft. They were classified prototypes that shouldn't have existed outside of official military channels, their very presence confirming everything Hawthorne had spent 20 years trying to prove. "They're burning everything," Morrison reported to Drake, watching the helicopters land at their makeshift command post. "Bringing in equipment that's still classified, deploying operators whose existence they deny. They're exposing their entire operation. Trying to contain this. The stealth modifications on those birds alone would confirm unauthorized use of military resources." Drake stood at the motel's window, his carefully maintained corporate facade cracking under the weight of mounting disaster. The operation was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated, pushing them toward increasingly desperate measures. Project Blacklight represents 2 decades of operations, billions in unauthorized funding, he told Morrison grimly. "If the Ghost's evidence gets out, it brings down more than just Phoenix. The entire shadow system collapses." In his command center, Hawthorne watched the helicopter's arrival through multiple surveillance feeds. Every piece of classified equipment they deployed, every unauthorized operator they brought in, only added to the documentation he'd spent 20 years gathering. His hidden cameras captured everything: serial numbers, tactical protocols, faces of operators who officially didn't exist. The helicopters themselves were a gold mine of evidence, their classified technology proving connections between Phoenix and unauthorized military programs. "More teams coming in," May reported through their secure channel, her voice tense but controlled. "Different equipment, different training. These aren't regular Phoenix operators. Their movement patterns, their equipment loadout, it's all elite level." "Special Activities Division," Hawthorne replied softly, watching the new operators. Deploy with lethal precision, the ones they send when nothing else works. Drake's calling in everything he has access to, burning every asset and connection they've spent years denying existed. Emma's research had revealed the true significance of this escalation. Special Activities Division is a black ops unit that officially doesn't exist, she explained to Randall as they monitored the situation from their hidden command post. They handle operations that are too sensitive for regular military channels. Their presence here, it confirms everything Hawthorne discovered at Spencer Canyon. These are the same people who tried to bury the truth 20 years ago. Throughout town, the new operators moved with calculated efficiency, establishing control points and surveillance positions. But the townspeople had been prepared for this too. Every shop window, every security camera, every seemingly ordinary piece of equipment contained hidden systems recording their movements. Years of careful preparation had transformed Carson's Ridge into a sophisticated intelligence gathering operation disguised as a quiet mountain town. They're good, Reeves observed from his position with the Scarlet Riders, watching the special activities teams through high-powered optics. Better than anyone we've seen. But look at their equipment, prototype weapons, experimental tactical gear. Just by being here, they're confirming everything the old man's been saying about unauthorized operations. Every move they make digs them deeper. Hawthorne's voice came through their secure channel, carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary in special operations circles. Phase 3 beginning, he informed the town's hidden network. Remember what we practiced. Let them think they're in control. Every piece of equipment they bring in, every protocol they employ, it all adds to the evidence we're gathering. The special activities teams began their operation with surgical precision, moving to isolate key points throughout the valley. But every position they took had been prepared in advance. Every tactic they employed had been anticipated years ago. Hawthorne had spent 2 decades studying their operational patterns, understanding how they would react when pushed into a corner. Sir, one of Drake's tactical commanders reported, his professional calm cracking. We're detecting anomalies in our secure communications. Someone's not just monitoring our channels, they're recording everything. Protocols, authorization, codes, operational details. The whole valley's rigged for signals intelligence gathering. Drake's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. He's not just fighting us, he realized, staring at the tactical displays showing their exposed position. He's forcing us to expose ourselves, to create evidence we can't deny. Every move we make, every asset we deploy, just strengthens his case. The old man's turned the entire valley into one giant documentation system. At the diner, May coordinated the town's response through their hidden network. Years of preparation had created a community capable of resistance that Phoenix never saw coming. Every business, every home, every public space had been subtly modified to gather intelligence. The diner's regular customers moved with practiced efficiency, each person playing their part in a plan 2 decades in the making. Remember what Thomas taught us, she told her staff as they served coffee to special activities operators while documenting their equipment. Everything they bring in, everything they say, it all matters. We're not just fighting them, we're exposing them. The helicopter's presence had drawn exactly the kind of attention that Phoenix couldn't afford. Satellite imagery showed increased activity from official military channels as unauthorized deployment of classified aircraft triggered automatic monitoring systems that Phoenix couldn't control or suppress. We've got government oversight programs activating, Morrison reported with growing alarm. The helicopter's IFF signatures are raising flags in multiple agencies. We're losing containment. Regular military channels are starting to ask questions we can't answer. Through his sophisticated surveillance network, Hawthorne watched his 20-year plan approaching its climax. Phoenix had committed more resources to this operation than anything since Spencer Canyon, drawing out elements of their organization that had remained hidden for decades. Every piece of classified equipment, every unauthorized operator, every secured transmission, all of it was being documented and distributed to servers beyond their reach. "Found something else," Emma reported urgently, her research revealing new connections. These special activities teams, they're the same unit that was at Spencer Canyon. Drake's bringing in the original operators, the ones who know the full scope of Project Blacklight. They're exposing their entire command structure, trying to contain this situation. Take a quick break and tell us what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. The impact of Phoenix's exposed operations spread far beyond Shadow Creek Valley. In Washington, D.C., secure communications networks lit up as evidence of unauthorized military operations began flooding official channels. Hawthorne's carefully preserved documentation, released through multiple secure servers, painted a devastating picture of corruption that spanned 2 decades. "It's everywhere," Morrison reported to Drake, monitoring the fallout through their remaining secure channels. Military oversight committees, intelligence agencies, congressional offices, they're all getting evidence of Project Blacklight. Every classified system we brought into this valley, every unauthorized operation we've run, is documented, all of it. Drake's command center had become a hub of mounting chaos. Emergency messages poured in from Phoenix's parent organization as the full scope of their exposure became clear. "Containment protocols have failed," his senior analyst reported. "We're tracking information releases across 3 continents, financial records, operational details, connections to official agencies. Everything we've spent 20 years hiding is coming to light." At his ranch, Hawthorne monitored the situation through his sophisticated surveillance network. The evidence he'd gathered wasn't just exposing Phoenix. It was revealing an entire shadow system of unauthorized military operations, private contractors using government resources, and billions in misappropriated funds. Multiple agencies responding, May reported from the diner's command center. FBI counterintelligence units mobilizing, military police deploying from 3 bases. The helicopters triggered exactly the attention he wanted. Through town, the special activities teams showed growing uncertainty. These elite operators were accustomed to working in shadows, their very existence denied by official channels. Now they found themselves exposed, their classified equipment and tactical protocols documented for the world to see. "Sir," a team leader reported to Drake, "we've got military oversight drones entering Valley airspace. Regular Army units are mobilizing from Fort Carson. We can't maintain operational security." Emma's research continued revealing new connections. "The evidence isn't just about Phoenix," she told Randall as they coordinated with law enforcement agencies. "Look at these financial trails, defense contractors, private military companies, even some foreign intelligence services." Hawthorne's exposed an entire network of unauthorized operations. The impact hit hardest in official military channels. The presence of classified prototype helicopters in civilian airspace had triggered automatic reporting systems. Now regular military commanders were demanding answers about unauthorized use of their resources. "Joint Chiefs are involved," Morrison reported grimly. "They're asking questions about missing equipment, unauthorized deployments, classified technology in private hands. The whole shadow system is unraveling." Reeves and his Scarlet Riders watched from their designated position as more official. Attention focused on the valley. "We were never the real target," he realized. "The old man used us to draw out something bigger. Every move Phoenix made trying to stop us just exposed more of their operation." Through his surveillance systems, Hawthorne monitored the growing chaos with grim satisfaction. His hidden cameras captured Phoenix operators frantically destroying equipment, trying to hide evidence of their unauthorized presence. But it was too late. Everything had already been documented and distributed. "Found something else," Emma reported urgently. "These aren't just random exposures. Look at the pattern. Each piece of evidence connects to others, revealing larger operations. He's not just exposing individual missions, he's showing how the whole system works." In Washington, the revelations triggered political earthquakes. Congressional oversight committees demanded explanations for billions in unaccounted military spending. Intelligence agencies scrambled to distance themselves from exposed operations. The shadow system that had operated with impunity for decades found itself suddenly thrust into daylight. "It's not just us," Drake realized, watching his organization's carefully constructed secrecy crumble. He's exposing everyone connected to Project Blacklight, every contractor, every official who looked the other way, every operation we've run. It's all coming out. The town's hidden network continued gathering evidence as Phoenix's desperation grew. Every attempt to contain the situation just created more documentation, more proof of their unauthorized activities. Hawthorne's 20 years of patience had created a trap they couldn't escape. Multiple agencies requesting landing clearance, May reported. FBI, military police, regular army units, they're all converging on the valley. Phoenix's attempt to contain this has just drawn official attention they can't control. But through secure channels, Hawthorne received confirmation that his evidence had reached key positions throughout the government. Project Blacklight's exposure was triggering investigations at the highest levels, revealing corruption that reached into multiple agencies. "Sir," Morrison told Drake, "we're getting orders from command. They're trying to distance themselves from the operation. We're being disavowed. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The next part of this incredible story will change everything." Nicholas Drake had spent his entire career managing crisis situations, but nothing had prepared him for the total collapse of Project Blacklight's security. In the Pine Creek Motel's command center, he watched 2 decades of carefully constructed secrecy crumble in real time. The classified helicopters that had seemed like a show of force now stood as evidence of unauthorized military operations, their very presence confirming everything Hawthorne had claimed. "We've lost containment on every level," Morrison reported, monitoring the chaos through their remaining secure channels. Military oversight committees are mobilizing, FBI counterintelligence units are inbound, and regular army units from Fort Carson are setting up blocking positions around the valley. Our own parent organization is trying to erase all connections to this operation. Through his surveillance network, Hawthorne watched Drake's mounting desperation with cold satisfaction. The Phoenix commander had finally realized the true nature of his situation. Every attempt to contain the exposure just created more evidence, more proof of their unauthorized activities. "Sir," one of the special activities team leaders reported, "to Drake, we've got a serious problem. Someone's accessing our secure databases through backdoors we didn't know existed. Operational files, mission reports, financial records, everything from the past 20 years is being copied and distributed." Drake's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. "Lock it down," he ordered. "Shut down every system, destroy all equipment, nothing leaves this valley." But Hawthorne had anticipated this too. His hidden cameras recorded Phoenix operators frantically destroying classified equipment, their very attempts at concealment creating more evidence of unauthorized activities. Every piece of military hardware they demolished, every document they burned, was already documented and distributed to secure servers worldwide. It's not just about exposing one operation, Emma explained to Randall as they coordinated with incoming federal agencies. Look at these connections. Defense contractors, private military companies, corrupt officials. He's revealing an entire shadow system that's operated outside official oversight for decades. In town, the special activities teams showed increasing signs of disarray. These elite operators, accustomed to working with absolute secrecy, found themselves exposed to official scrutiny. Their classified equipment, their tactical protocols, even their very presence, everything had been documented and revealed. They're going to make one last push. Hawthorne's voice came through the town's secure network. Drake knows he's finished, but he'll try to reach the ranch, destroy any evidence he thinks I still have here. May coordinated the town's response from the diner's hidden command center. All observation posts reporting movement, she informed the network. They're consolidating forces, moving everything they have left toward the ranch. Through his sophisticated surveillance systems, Hawthorne watched Drake personally organizing the final assault. The Phoenix commander had gathered his remaining operators, hardened veterans who'd handled the organization's most sensitive operations, but their tactical expertise meant nothing against 2 decades of careful preparation. This ends tonight, Drake told his assembled teams. Whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, the ghost doesn't leave this valley with any more evidence. But even as he spoke, more official attention focused on Shadow Creek Valley. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon, regular, Army units responding to the unauthorized use of classified aircraft. FBI teams established positions around the valley's perimeter, while military police units moved to secure evidence of unauthorized operations. They still don't understand. Reeves observed from his position with the Scarlet Riders. Everything they're doing, every move they make, it's all being recorded. The old man's not just fighting them, he's documenting their desperation. Hawthorne's voice carried quiet authority as he addressed the town's hidden network. Remember, what we practiced, he instructed. Let them come. Every step they take just adds to the evidence we're gathering. Drake led his remaining forces up the winding road toward Hawthorne's ranch, their movement patterns showing the precision that had made them legends in shadow operations. But every approach they took had been prepared for, every tactic they might employ had been anticipated years in advance. Target all surveillance positions, Drake ordered as they neared the ranch. Nothing records what happens here. This ends with us and the ghost. But Hawthorne had prepared for this moment, longer than any of them had imagined. His hidden cameras continued recording as Phoenix made their final push, documenting every piece of classified equipment, every unauthorized operator, every desperate attempt to contain what could no longer be contained. Multiple teams converging on the ranch, May reported through secure channels. They're committing everything they have left. Good, Hawthorne replied softly. Let's show them what 20 years of patience looks like. Take a quick break and tell us what you think happens next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories coming your way. The final confrontation began in darkness, as Drake led his remaining Phoenix operators in what they thought would be an overwhelming assault on Hawthorne's ranch. Their night vision equipment showed no movement. Their thermal imaging revealed no heat signatures. The ranch house stood dark and seemingly abandoned against the starlit Wyoming sky. All teams in position. Drake's voice carried quiet authority over their secure channel. Remember, the ghost dies tonight. Whatever else happens, whatever evidence he's gathered, it ends here. But Hawthorne had spent 20 years preparing for this exact moment. Through his sophisticated surveillance network, he watched them move into precisely the positions he'd anticipated, following tactical patterns he'd studied and counted countless times in his preparation. They're committed now, he informed. May through their hidden communication system, moving exactly as expected. Time to show them what real preparation looks like. The first sign that something was wrong came when Phoenix's electronic warfare system suddenly failed completely. Their secure communications went dead. Their tactical displays showed impossible readings. Their night vision equipment revealed phantom signatures that shouldn't have existed. "We're blind," Morrison reported urgently. "All systems compromised. Can't maintain tactical coordination." Through his command center's displays, Hawthorne watched their growing confusion with cold satisfaction. Every piece of classified equipment they'd brought, every tactical protocol they employed, just added to the evidence being recorded and transmitted to secure servers worldwide. "Sir?" one of Drake's team leaders reported with growing alarm. "We're picking up multiple approaching aircraft. Military signatures, regular army units, FBI tactical teams. The whole valley's about to be locked down." But Drake had passed the point of rational calculation. 20 years of secrets were exposed. His organization's carefully maintained cover was shattered, and all he had left was the desperate need to silence the man who'd orchestrated it all. "Push forward," he ordered. "Whatever it takes, we finish. This tonight." The Phoenix operators were good, their movement patterns showing the kind of training that came from years of classified operations. But they were fighting on ground that had been prepared for them long before they arrived. Every approach they took had been pre-sighted. Every tactic they might employ had been counted in advance. From concealed positions throughout the property, Hawthorne's first shots came with surgical precision, not killing shots. He wasn't just fighting them, he was documenting their presence, creating evidence that couldn't be denied. Each bullet disabled equipment, exposed positions, forced them to reveal their classified hardware. "He's everywhere," a team leader shouted as another piece of sophisticated surveillance gear was disabled with impossible accuracy. "Can't get a fix on his position." In town, May coordinated the community's response through their hidden network. Years of preparation had created a system capable of recording every move Phoenix made, every piece of equipment they deployed, every operator they exposed. "Remember what Thomas taught us," she told the observation teams. "Document everything, every shot, every movement, every piece of classified gear. It all adds to the evidence." Drake's frustration mounted as his carefully planned assault disintegrated into chaos. His elite operators, accustomed to working with absolute tactical superiority, found themselves constantly outmaneuvered by an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. 20 years, Hawthorne's voice suddenly came through their disabled communications network, carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary. 20 years preparing this ground, studying your tactics, waiting for you to make exactly these mistakes. Everything you've brought here, everything you've tried to hide, it's all documented now. Through his surveillance systems, Hawthorne watched Drake break from his team, moving alone toward the ranch house. The Phoenix commander had finally snapped, abandoning tactical doctrine in his desperation to end the threat to his organization. "Just you and me now, Ghost," Drake called out, his corporate facade completely gone. "Time to finish what we started at Spencer Canyon." "Already finished," Hawthorne replied, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Everything you tried to bury, every secret you thought was safe. It's all exposed now. Project Blacklight, Phoenix's operations, 20 years of unauthorized activities. Can't hide it anymore, Nicholas." Around them, the sounds of approaching aircraft grew louder. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. FBI teams established containment positions around the valley, while military police units moved to secure evidence of unauthorized operations. "It's over." Hawthorne's voice carried finality. "The only question is whether you face it like a soldier or die trying to bury the truth again." Drake's response was to open fire at shadows, his desperation finally overwhelming his training. But Hawthorne had anticipated this too. His final shot, fired from over 1,000 yards in near-total darkness, took Drake's weapon with surgical precision, leaving the Phoenix commander standing exposed as official forces converged on the valley. Take a moment to like and subscribe. The final part of this incredible story will leave you speechless. 1 month after the night that exposed Project Blacklight, Shadow Creek Valley had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The quiet ranching community that had harbored America's deadliest sniper for 20 years had become the center of a story that shook the foundations of military and intelligence communities worldwide. Hawthorne stood on his ranch's porch, watching the sunrise over peaks he'd chosen 2 decades ago. Through his surveillance systems, he could see the last FBI evidence teams finishing their work in town. The volume of classified equipment and documentation they'd recovered had exceeded anything in federal law enforcement history. Final numbers came in, May reported, bringing his morning coffee just as she had for 20 years. But now, there was a deeper understanding in her eyes, a recognition of what he'd truly been all those years. 37 high-ranking officials indicted, 12 private military companies exposed, over $3 billion in unauthorized military spending traced and documented. Emma joined them, carrying fresh files from her ongoing research. The evidence you gathered, it's changing. Everything. Congressional oversight committees are rewriting regulations on private military contractors. 3 federal agencies are being restructured. The whole shadow system of unauthorized operations is being dismantled. Through his sophisticated monitoring equipment, Hawthorne watched the final Phoenix operatives being transferred to federal custody. Drake, stripped of his corporate authority and facing multiple federal indictments, had finally broken under interrogation. His testimony was exposing connections that reached into the highest levels of military and intelligence communities. "Got word from Washington," Sheriff Randall reported, climbing the porch steps. "They're calling it the largest corruption investigation in military history. Your documentation was perfect. 20 years of evidence, all verified, all admissible." In federal court, the town itself had emerged changed, but stronger. The skills Hawthorne had quietly instilled over 2 decades, observation, coordination, resilience, had transformed Carson's Ridge from a simple ranching community into something remarkable. Other towns were already sending representatives to learn their methods of community organization and defense. More requests coming in, May added, showing him messages from across the country. Law enforcement agencies, community organizations, even military units. They all want to know how we did it. How one town stood up to a private military company and won. Hawthorne's voice carried quiet satisfaction. They won because they were prepared, because they learned to stand together, to watch, to document. The truth is the most powerful weapon if you have the patience to gather it properly. In town, life was returning to normal, but with subtle differences. The diner's hidden command center had become a training facility, teaching other communities how to organize and protect themselves. Bill Henderson's hardware store now included a sophisticated surveillance equipment section. Even the local church had started community defense classes. "They're calling it the Shadow Creek Protocol," Emma explained, showing him news reports from across the country. "A new model for community organization and resistance against unauthorized corporate operations. Your methods are being studied, adapted, implemented nationwide." Through his surveillance network, Hawthorne monitored the broader impact of Project Blacklight's exposure. Private military companies were facing unprecedented scrutiny. Defense contractors found themselves subject to new oversight regulations. The shadow system of unauthorized operations he'd discovered at Spencer Canyon was being systematically dismantled. "The Scarlet Riders sent a message," Randall added. "Reeves and his men are cooperating with federal investigators exposing other criminal organizations that used Phoenix for protection. The whole network is unraveling. Hawthorne's patient strategy had accomplished more than just revenge. It had triggered systemic change. The evidence he'd gathered over 20 years wasn't just prosecuting individual criminals. It was reforming the entire system that had allowed them to operate. "Found something else in the records," Emma reported, "after Spencer Canyon when they thought they'd killed you. There were other operators who questioned the mission. Some of them started gathering their own evidence. Your example inspired others to watch, to document, to wait for the right moment." The legacy of the ghost would no longer be measured in confirmed kills or impossible shots, but in communities empowered to stand together, in systems of accountability restored, in truth finally exposed after decades of patience. What happens now? May asked, watching federal vehicles make their final departure from the valley. Hawthorne's weathered face showed the ghost of a smile. "Now we teach others. Show them what we learned here. Truth doesn't just expose corruption, it prevents it. When communities know how to stand together, how to watch, how to document, that's how real change happens." The sun climbed higher over Shadow Creek Valley, illuminating a community forever changed by the quiet rancher who'd chosen them 20 years ago. Hawthorne's legacy would live on not just in military legend, but in countless communities learning to stand together against corruption, to watch patiently, to document truth, and to fight injustice the quiet way. In Washington, the ripples of his operation continued spreading. Congressional committees drafted new oversight legislation. Military commands reorganized to prevent unauthorized operations. Intelligence agencies faced unprecedented scrutiny. The shadow system that had operated with impunity for decades found itself exposed to the light of public accountability. "Got another message from the FBI Training Academy," Randall mentioned. "They want to make Shadow Creek Valley a case study. In community organization and defense, your methods are becoming official doctrine." The quiet rancher, who'd spent 20 years preparing his trap, had changed more than just his valley. He'd created a template for resistance that would outlast any single victory, a legacy of patience and preparation that would continue protecting communities long after his own story faded into legend. The ghost's greatest victory wasn't measured in targets eliminated, but in truths exposed and communities empowered. Shadow Creek Valley stood as living proof that patience, preparation, and unity could overcome even the most entrenched corruption, if you had the wisdom to wait and watch for exactly the right moment. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.